The church's change in the catechism, the development of the Catholic Church teaching on the death penalty, that's worth talking about. Did you know that on September 8th, when the new, there were some changes in the Catholic Catechism that were issued by the Church. The Pope promulgated it. The significance of this is that people like Justice Scalia and people like Harry Connick and people who are Catholics, really people like Governor Pataki, and you just start naming these Catholic folks, up to this point have been able to say, I'm standing in the Catholic tradition, my church supports me in my support of the death penalty. They can support the death penalty, they just can't do it anymore in the name of their faith, in the name of their religion, and that is really a significant step in the right direction.
This woman, Dr. Jean Hoff, testified that as last month's scheduled execution date grew closer, Kelly displayed increased anxiousness and that his face grew solemn. This evaluation differed from the previous testimony of two psychiatrists who said Kelly is so mentally impaired he has no awareness of his crimes or his punishment. Dr. Hoff stopped short of declaring Horace Kelly competent or incompetent.
Regardless of what the symptoms are that she talked about, when it came time to make her final decision, to give her opinion on the topic, she says, I have no opinion. That's what her testimony was. That's what her report said. She did not say Mr. Kelly was competent to be executed.
The prosecution says tomorrow it will call a psychiatrist who will say that.
I think that there's evidence to show that he is competent under the legal definition.
Such a distinction is crucial because if Kelly can prove to the jury he is not merely mentally ill but mentally incompetent, he would avoid the death penalty.
A mental illness does not equal mental insanity. It just does not. That's not the legal definition. Someone can be mentally ill or mentally abnormal but still be sane under the definition of sane for the purposes of execution.
I don't think I ever attempted to portray to that jury that Mr. Kelly didn't have some problems. He has had problems of low IQ, for instance, that are documented going back many years. But the issue is not just what his IQ is. It's whether, as I just stated to you, whether he understood the fact that he was going to be executed, and did he know that the reason he was going to be executed was because he had murdered, in this case, 3 people back in Riverside and San Bernardino County.
3 prison psychiatrists examined Mr. Kelly as required by law, none of whom could find him sane for purpose of execution.
There was only one piece of evidence that showed that he was possibly aware of why he was being executed, and that was Dr. McEwen's testimony that he had been able to name his victims and their ages.
She was one of the 7 mental health professionals who interviewed Mr. Kelly, and she was actually the only one who found that he was fit for execution. Of course, I had a lot of problems with her testimony. She did certain kinds of things. I don't know if you all read about it in the newspaper, but she played tic-tac-toe with Mr. Kelly. I don't know exactly why she was playing tic-tac-toe with him, but they played 5 games of tic-tac-toe, and in the course of that, he beat her or tied her in 5 out of 5 games of tic-tac-toe. When the Mr. Mazur, who was representing Mr. Kelly, asked her about that, she said, well, I'm just not very good at playing games like that. And I thought that was kind of a cop-out. Now, either she was being disingenuous when she said that, in which case I would have to doubt her veracity, or she was being truthful, in which case I would have to doubt her competence. I think any first grader can play tic-tac-toe and do a good job of it.
Court-appointed psychiatrist Diane McEwen testified she believes Kelly is aware he murdered 3 people in 1984 and aware that the state wants to execute him.
You have to understand why you're being executed. That's part of this hearing. And the testimony today shows that he does have an understanding of what happened 14 years ago. There was testimony early on by some of the defense witnesses that he didn't have a long-term memory, but the testimony today seemed to support the position that he does have a long-term memory.
Kelly's defense attorney hammered away at McEwen's methods and questioned her expertise in handling a patient like Horace Kelly.
Well, I'll argue what I think, what weight should be given to her based upon her qualifications, based upon her experience, the way she conducted the interviews. I mean, that's what that's what argument is about.
Horace Kelly does have a new execution date. If a jury finds him mentally competent in this hearing, if all appeals are denied and Governor Wilson refuses to grant clemency, then Horace Kelly would be executed a little more than a month from now on June the 9th. In San Rafael, Rob Roth for the 10 o'clock news.
There were other problems with Dr. McEwen's testimony. She, for example, wrote in her report, which, by the way, was never admitted into evidence, and the jury was never actually able to look at it, in which she said she made note that Mr. Kelly had mentioned the names of his victims and mentioned that he had a van. Apparently, the van was involved in the crimes in some way. But when Mr. Mazur, Mr. Kelly's attorney, asked her about the van, where did she learn about the van, Dr. McEwen said first that she had read it in papers that Mr. Mazur's office had sent to her. But Mr. Mazur's group went through the papers and there was no mention of a van whatsoever in the papers that they sent to Dr. McEwen. Then Dr. McEwen said, oh, well, maybe that's not where I learned it. Maybe Mr. Kelly told me after all, which, you know, is backtracking on her original comments and suggests the potential for perjury or at least impeachment of her testimony. But what was interesting is that on the very day that she interviewed Mr. Kelly and the very day that she claimed that he told her the names of the victims and the fact that he had a van, there was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle that mentioned the names of the victims, their ages, and the fact that he had a van. So that leaves open a possibility to me that Dr. McEwen read the information in the newspaper and that it ended up somehow in her report. It was also interesting to me that of the 7 mental health professionals that interviewed and tested Mr. Kelly only mentioned the names of his victims and their ages to Dr. McEwen and to no one else, and I thought that that was itself interesting. Why did he open up to her rather than anyone else? I mean, there was enough there for me to doubt Dr. McEwen and her testimony and her veracity against all the evidence of the other mental health professionals who looked at Mr. Kelly and said that he was insane.
He knows what's happening, and I think he knows what...
You stole from a blind guy?